Welcome to the last pelvic and urinary healing podcast you'll ever need. I'm Michael Hodge, and together we're going to go on a journey of truth and discovery and liberation. The podcast is named this because that's my intention. My intention for you is to get off this merry-go-round of more doctor visits, treatments, therapies, more information, and still not really seeing results because I was there. I went through 5 years of chronic pelvic floor issues. And if I can help you recover in months instead of years, that's a really meaningful use of my life. There's a major lack of understanding in the area of pelvic, urinary, and sexual health, which keeps people stuck in this loop. The division of the mind from the body and the emotions. We're bringing it all back together because you're all one being, you're all one organism. And in this podcast, I'm presenting you my greatest understanding of the truth, information that's based in science, backed by research studies by a wide range of clinicians, and most directly from my own life experience. I was there exactly where you're at now, from overcoming chronic pelvic floor, urinary, and sexual issues. I had issues in all of those departments. So I'll go over that later on as well. And I've since worked with over 1,000 men who were dealing with these issues. I had no idea I'd ever be doing this. I never knew I would have that crushing, challenging, chronic pain situation. But I'm grateful to have changed who I was being anyway for myself, and then also to be able to give back to others. The men that I've worked with are actual clients. We collect data on what works, on what doesn't. We collect quantitative and qualitative information because if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. So we're refining and improving the model. Even though this is ancient traditional wisdom, it's not that the way your body heals itself has changed over time. Your body heals itself intrinsically. It's just why would your brain create pain or dysfunction? Of course, the thoughts, the emotions, these life situations that we deal with have relevance versus just how we move our body or what we eat. So we are going to be integrating all the parts into the whole. And I'm giving you a path, a plan, the information. Ultimately, I want you to be able to get back to living life, a life of joy, of love, of connection. I remember whenever I was going through this, it felt like I was half alive. And what I'm doing here is just giving you information, a path, a plan, and maybe an insertion of energy, right? So let's do this together. So, what are we going to do together on this podcast? I'm going to show you how this happened to you and why you're still having symptoms. I'll talk about my own life experience with close to suicide pelvic floor and urinary issues. I'll get into the brain science so that you can see the mechanics behind your symptoms. We'll talk about neural circuit pain and dysfunction and how this can create your symptoms. I'll even guide you through a self assessment so that you can discern what you are dealing with and that you know how to address it. I'll show you how to calm your brain to take the fear out of the symptoms, ultimately leading to healthy neural pathways and letting go of the issues. I'll give you some practices that you can do now to calm your symptoms. We'll talk about why emotions matter, how to feel them, and how to let go of any that have been stuck. You will learn how to lean into the new you by envisioning and identifying new habits and ways of being that are aligned with health and balance. So, a lot of amazing things are coming up in this podcast. Now, quick disclaimer, this is for non structural genitourinary dysfunction. If you have a current bacterial infection, recent tissue damage, cancer, another significant structural finding, consider continuing with biomedical intervention. And of course, visit your physician, go to your doctor and get checked out, get assistance. This is for information purposes only. And this is again about non structural genitourinary dysfunction. What does that even mean? I'll be getting into that. You might think, no, I have pelvic floor tension. Like I feel that in my body, or I think that there really is something wrong. There may or there may not be, right? I'm going to help guide you on an assessment and you're going to be able to discern better. Is your brain creating this? And even if it is, it's very real. The symptoms are very real versus there being structural pathology, something in the body that is directly creating the symptoms. So If you have structural genitourinary dysfunction, this podcast isn't custom fit for your situation. Now, we are still going to talk about the mental emotional side that could be exacerbating your symptoms, even if you do have a structural element, by the way, which is still very helpful. This is not medical advice. I'm not treating, diagnosing, or directing you to take specific actions. Use your own discernment and everything that is said here. Also, by the way, this is relevant for sexual dysfunction. If you have erectile dysfunction or premature ejaculation, I won't specifically tailor it to those symptoms, but it still has the same root cause relevance. Also, this podcast is for women too. Anyone who has a pelvic floor is going to benefit from this if you're dealing with chronic pelvic or urinary issues. To this point, I've been working with men, so I might give more examples with a male anatomy or with male clients that I've worked with, but ultimately this is for women and men. I won't go into the specific anatomy or overly medicalize the body. I'm going to keep it really simple and direct because you don't have to know how the lungs work in order to breathe. So you might be wondering, is this podcast even for me? Let me list some common conditions that have relevance for what we'll be doing together in this podcast: chronic pelvic floor and urinary issues, and also some common symptoms because you might not have a diagnosis or a specific labeled condition. So, some common conditions you might have come across one of these or believe that that's what you're dealing with or had someone diagnose you this way. CPPS, which is chronic pelvic pain syndrome, pelvic floor dysfunction, hard flaccid, hypertonic pelvic floor, pudendal neuralgia, overactive bladder, urinary frequency, urinary hesitancy, nocturia, perhaps testicular pain, levator erectile dysfunction, having painful anal intercourse, urinary burning, a chronic UTI, burning or pain after ejaculation, interstitial cystitis, vulvodynia, vaginismus, and some other symptoms that you might be experiencing. So, anywhere in the anus, testicles, perineum, lower abdomen, penis, urethra, vagina, clitoris, such as sharp pain, dullness, discomfort, tingling, burning, itching, tightness, weird feelings, nerve pain, and any random, odd, rare symptom that's showing up in this area, the pelvic, anal, genital, bladder area that has no obvious structural cause. I remember having really weird symptoms come up. I'd have like a nerve pain going down my leg only whenever I peed, or I had this sort of discomfort, like a ball filling in my perineum. Like things would change over time. And I couldn't find like this specific symptom always. So there could be some odd thing taking place. And that's what we're talking about. If you're experiencing one of these conditions or symptoms, this podcast is for you. Okay, so I want to tell you my story. Why am I even doing this work? What happened in my life? I was 22 years old, and after ejaculating, having sex one time, it felt as if my right testicle had flipped. Not all the way, but it felt very odd. And I'm like, this feels weird. And I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and something just didn't feel right. It wasn't extremely painful. And I looked it up and Googled. I'm like, okay, must not be a testicular torsion because there would be extreme pain. But there was some fear, right? I mean, 22 years old. These are my man parts. I'm like, I want to make sure I'm okay. The next day, it still felt a little dull and discomfort and odd. So I went to my general physician and he was like, oh, everything should be fine. It looks normal. I can't tell that your testicle's not in the right place. Here are some antibiotics. It could be prostatitis. So I took those initially. And the weird feeling didn't go away. I ended up going to a urologist. Again, there wasn't anything specific found. I was continued on antibiotics. I was given Flomax and some other things, and was pretty much told you really shouldn't be dealing with anything like this at your age. Your vital signs, everything else about your health seems fine right now. And it wasn't terrible initially. It was just kind of in and out. But about 5 months later, I started to have perennial pain. The perineum, which is in between the base of the testicles and the anus, right there in the center. And it really started to get bad. It was hard to sit down. That would create pain after ejaculation. It was painful when I was exercising. Things really escalated. And again, I went down the path of Western medicine some more. I went to 3 urologists total. I had an ultrasound, I had other diagnostic exams, blood work, urine samples, all the things. And nothing could be found that really should be causing this severity of symptoms. And like many of you, I went in lots of different directions with it. Um, I realized I needed to learn how to heal myself and also wanted to work with holistic practitioners. I went to acupuncture, chiropractor. I went to physical therapy for a year. I read lots of books. I did all the stretches. I had my checklist every day, like 12 different things. Take these herbs in the morning, do this stretch, do this breath work, do so many things to do every single day. And I was like, I'm so disciplined because this was the hardest thing I'd ever dealt with in my life that I'll do whatever it takes to get better. It's like, I want to be able to have good sex again. I want to be able to sit down without being in pain. I want to be able to play with my daughter. I want to be able to um, lift weights and exercise and just live life again because this was happening in my 20s. And I would get some improvement and then it would get bad again. Some improvement, I would flare up a lot. I would get triggered by so much. It was extremely challenging. On top of it, I had urinary symptoms as well. I had urinary hesitancy. It would take 5 minutes just to start the flow of urine. It would be really frustrating to, especially in public bathrooms, to be hovering over that urinal right there. And I remember when my son was with me sometimes, he'd be waiting for several minutes, like, "Why have you not peed yet?" And just the beginning of the flow of urine was very difficult to start because of the tension and the tightness. Also, I would have to pee multiple times before I could go to sleep and then at nights. And if there was even more stress at play, my urinary frequency would go up. Premature ejaculation was definitely something that worsened, and erectile dysfunction was there as well at parts throughout this entire experience. So there was a lot going on, and I honestly thought that I was doing everything right. I was letting everything go. I thought I was. I was like, I'm going to purify myself. I became a vegetarian. I'm going to purify my mind. I'm going to purify my thoughts, my actions, everything about the way I live my life, and just be wholesome and balanced. And it still wouldn't go away, right? The symptoms were still really, really strong. It was hard. I really didn't understand why I was alive anymore. I really didn't. I was like, I think I'm doing everything right. I think that I'm living life with purpose and love and attempting to care for others and do something positive in my life, yet it was still there. So a lot of darkness, a lot of challenges went on throughout this period of time. And I did make some shifts. I also worked with a practitioner who helped me to start from back to zero, basically, back to square one. We looked at the Western medicine side, the Eastern medicine side. We did some diet things. We did some acupuncture. We did some chiropractic. But on top of that, I was really starting to shift my mindset more. Essentially, I was surrendering and not taking it as seriously. And this is a really important thing to point out beyond even the therapeutic aspects we were doing at the latter part of my healing journey, by the way. Because sure, I did stretches and I did meditation and I did some diet changes, etc., which I had tried a lot of those things already many times over. It wasn't like it was the first time I had tried it. A really big shift for me was that I woke up and I was like, you know what? Today's okay. It's okay if there's some tension. It's okay if there's pain right now when I do things. Okay. Like, how can I experience joy? Today is okay. I had this fixation on being 100% better. And I'm like, you know what? I'll do whatever it takes to get 100% better because I know that's possible for me. And I had a lot of resistance that was created because of that. So, a big thing that I had to do was pretty much let go of needing to be healed. And paradoxically, that is what allowed me to be healed. Now, I thought that I was like, okay, let go of this. And I did. My pelvic floor issues were extreme. And so after that, I had little flare ups here and there, but I was on a very strict diet because I thought that the diet thing had helped me a lot. So I was like, if I eat anything, grains or dairy or nuts or chocolate or sugars, like a lot of things, it would flare me up some. And I was like really scared to go back to where I was because it was very dark and challenging. So I was very strict on those things. And it's interesting because I didn't recognize it. I had some food sensitivities and digestive dysregulation. And I had headaches for several months and I had different things coming up. I'm like, wow, I ended up learning after the fact about mind body syndrome, psychophysiologic disorders, and TMS. And I was like, wow, okay. I thought that I stepped past this pelvic floor stuff, but actually, it's symptom imperative phenomenon. It moved to another part of my body. It moved to I still had some more things to let go of. I still had more personality tendencies that were running the show and habits that I had softened, but had to soften even more, let's say. And then once I learned more about mind body syndrome, I realized, wow, I've actually had MBS issues since childhood because when I was a kid, for I don't remember how long it was, it could have been 6 months or so, I had this urinary frequency thing that was really embarrassing and challenging. I rode the bus and I had to pee like soon after getting on the bus. I had to tell my bus driver, Mr. Irvin Dawkins, who an amazing guy, but he would stop for me and I had to get out and pee on the side of the road. I went inside of people's houses sometimes. It was mortifying and it was so I literally had to go. That went on for a little bit. I also had headaches for a couple of years in my childhood that no one could figure out. My parents were not jumping at going like, "Oh, we've got to go to the doctor. We got to figure this out." No, but after a while, they're like, "Okay, we'll take you to the doctor." And then they even took me to a neurologist and yeah, they couldn't find anything. So these mind body syndrome issues, it's interesting when you realize that there are a lot of different symptoms you've had and manifestations in many cases throughout your life. That might not be true for you, and that's okay. But I just want to share my own story because, yes, I overcame the 5 years of extreme pelvic floor issues. But then, even after that, I had the continuation of other mind body syndrome symptoms. And now I can say I don't have any chronic issues. I'm so grateful for that. Of course, I have acute situations that will arise. They're arising to tell me that something is imbalanced, and I can notice it much more quickly. And I can listen to the undercurrent of what caused it and make a shift in a way that I now am able to do. So I'm very grateful for everything I've gone through, even though it's been hard. So you're probably wondering how all this happened, why you're dealing with these issues right now. Let's talk about the dysfunction cycle. And let's talk about Jake. So Jake masturbated 3 times in one day. And on the last time, he felt a weird sensation in his penis and pain in his perineum. Now, keep in mind, around the same time period, his girlfriend actually just broke up with him 2 months ago, unexpectedly. He's also being pushed to the limit at work right now, and he has some financial pressures with mounting debt and not enough income. Now, also keep in mind that there's not always a perceived initiating event, but the mind has a tendency to search for the reason why this pain or dysfunction is present in this part of the body. So that's the initiating event in Jake's story that he talks about. Now his nervous system upregulates. He goes into fight or flight, right? His brain goes into survival mode, very much like what happened with me, trying to fix or figure out what's going on because this has never happened before. So soon after he visits his primary care doctor and is obviously afraid that something's wrong with his man parts and this is a high priority to him. His doctor says that it might be prostatitis and prescribes antibiotics. So he takes these. He's like, all right, this should go away pretty soon. And after a little while, it's still not gone. And that there's actually this next step in the cycle, which is tension. The pelvic floor has been tensing up in response to the nervous system upregulation, right? That had already taken place. And this will create even more tightness, more tension, which can then worsen, you could say, the symptoms. So he goes to the urologist. He's like, okay, I think I need another opinion. I might need to get this checked out more deeply. And he's given urine tests. He's sent for an ultrasound and they get everything back. He's like, okay, there's nothing really wrong that we're finding in these tests. So he just gives him more antibiotics and gives him some other medications. After a while, the tension is still there. The pain hasn't gone away. So he decides to go to physical therapy. because he finds out that, okay, this could be something that is because of the way I've been sitting or the way I've been exercising, my posture. There might be a need for me to move around my pelvic floor and basically release this. So he goes for 6 months, twice a week, and they work on releasing the pelvic floor tension. And there is some improvement. He's like, okay, this is starting to feel a little bit better. That's awesome. But he really depends on those PT visits because he might be having a lot of trouble over the weekend. He's got a lot going on mentally, emotionally, and in his body. And he's like, oh, I can't wait for my appointment on Monday. Kind of leaning on that visit to feel better. So there's definitely some big ups and downs along this process, right? And if you look at the cycle, dysfunction is enhancing. It's actually getting worse. It's amplifying. The pain is now in his perineum and sometimes his left testicle. He flares up badly upon ejaculation. He has to pee several times at night. He only gets relief lying down with his legs up. And life is getting really hard. He he's like, I've got to figure out what this is. There has to be a way to fix this. And he looks for more interventions. He actually gets injections to reduce the pain because it gets so severe. He goes to another urologist. He's like, I'm going to get another opinion because that first urologist maybe just doesn't understand what's going on in my body. He gets a more thorough workup with an MRI and even a cystoscopy, which feels absolutely atrociously awful as he gets it, and he doesn't want to get that done, but he's okay, and he's just getting all the boxes checked essentially, right? He even does acupuncture. He's maybe if I do something more natural. He works with a naturopath as well. Maybe there's something going on with what I'm eating. He explores his diet. He adds in herbs, starts taking them every morning, every night. He does food sensitivity testing. He's like, okay, maybe it's because of gluten, maybe it's because of dairy, maybe it's because of a specific thing I'm eating that's creating inflammation, that's then creating tightness and dysfunction. I've got to check that out. There's an emotional response, which has been happening, of course, such as fear. He has thoughts such as, will I ever get better? I can't believe it's been so long. Like, why has this been going on for years now? This should have been fixed already. I don't know if I'm ever going to even be able to have good sex again or work out or just do the things that I love. There's depression. There's a closing off to life. There's a helplessness. There's anxiety and more worries about the future and a sadness. It's like a grief and a loss for how life used to be and how limited he's experiencing life now. And he does holistic approaches. He's starting to go a little bit more internal, meditating, doing stretches, going to yoga classes, more diet changes. He continues to scour Reddit and other forums with sufferers. He's in a Discord group, they're chatting about it. This has led him to chronic fight or flight. So he's now been experiencing an upregulated nervous system that has become the new normal for the organism, for his mind body system, right? And it's become the baseline. And he started to accommodate his triggers using a donut cushion so that he can sit down, rarely masturbating or having sex because he's afraid of flaring up, sitting next to the bathroom on the plane, or always being aware of where a bathroom is because of the urinary frequency that has been arising, eating a very strict diet, not wanting to break outside of the diet, and fear of making his symptoms get worse. And then he also started physical therapy and stretching again to maybe be a bit more disciplined this time to see if it works better. Due to this chronic upregulated nervous system, he's become highly sensitive to triggers, such as sitting down, ejaculation, eating gluten or dairy or caffeine, even cold temperatures, all trigger symptoms instantly due to this raised and heightened sensitivity in the nervous system. And Jake finally finds the Overcome program. He listens to this podcast, he does our program. He actually discovers his root causes that led him to what he thought was the initiating incident of masturbating 3 times. And he thought that's when it all started. But that was really just the straw that broke the camel's back. There was a lot leading up to that incident. And he's now symptom free. He now is free to live life, to be himself. And he's much more connected internally to how he's feeling emotionally, to what's really going on inside. And that's the story of Jake. It's crazy, but archetypically speaking, Jake's story was my story. I've worked with so many men who have had a very similar story. And any ladies who are listening, I mean, maybe you've been going through very similar things. You can again replace the anatomy or some of the symptoms, and it's the same concept. But there's so many. It's sometimes you're just barking up the wrong tree. You're like doing all these mechanical therapies, and we do want to check them out first. But there comes a time when we need to go deeper and recognize, wow, actually, I have responsibility for creating my symptoms. Nothing is random. It didn't just happen out of nowhere. And since I can't find a structural pathology, there has to be some sort of pathology inside of myself, right? So that's what we're presenting here in this podcast. Now, I want to talk about the four levels of causation because it's all real at different levels. Everything is interrelated, but are you digging into the root cause or just addressing the surface symptoms? That's a really important question. So let's look at the first level of causation. You could see this like a pyramid if you would like. It kind of goes a little bit deeper and deeper, but it's all interconnected. The first level we'll talk about is body. So in the body, you have tightness in your pelvic floor, maybe. It is physical, it is verifiable. You can actually feel it. But what is making your pelvic floor tight? You feel the urge to pee even after voiding your bladder. But what is sending the signal? Again, the next level we'll talk about is mind. Maybe you have anxious, worrisome thoughts, where you engage in high alert, danger signal creating behaviors like incessant technology use and distraction, reacting to what happens instantly versus staying calm and centered, constantly planning and organizing and thinking ahead about all the things you'll do and that you need to do and the responsibilities and what you're going to do next and what you're going to do tomorrow and how you're building out your life next, etc. Are you living through personality tendencies that are stress inducing? Some of the things I just mentioned, and I'll go over more of them later. Is there an imbalanced overuse of the mind? So, this is a level of causation as well. Let's talk about the next level of causation, emotions. Maybe you lack emotional awareness. Maybe you were raised in a way that listening and feeling and being with your emotions and your feelings wasn't that important. And it was honestly looked down upon. There may be emotions beneath the surface from the present, from the recent past, or even many years ago that have not yet been released. And let's talk about the last level of causation, which I call essence. Are you disconnected from your essence, from your authentic self, who you truly are? If you remove the programming and the masks, the personas that have been placed upon you, that you have allowed to be placed upon you to a degree, but earlier in your life, they were placed upon you from familial, societal, cultural, religious programming and conditioning. Is there a fear of upsetting someone? Or are you afraid to risk being criticized? Are you afraid to fail, right? There could be other things that are holding you back from being your purest essence. And this creates a vibrational mismatch, right? Because you can have a vibrational mismatch in your way of being, ultimately, your personality that you're living life through. You can have a mismatch in the type of work that you do, in the relationships that you have, whether it be your romantic relationship or friends, in the environment where you live, right? If a rabbit grows up in a family of vultures, it's going to feel out of place. It wants to fly. It doesn't understand why they're always eating meat. It's like that's a vibrational mismatch. So maybe you grew up in a family that felt very different from you, and you're like, I've got to be like them. If I'm not like them, I'm not going to be loved. There could be a lot of things. Maybe it wasn't even a family, but it was at school or with friends or at work. But notice who you are. And the basis for all of this that I'm referring to here in the essence level of causation is energetic. By the way, all of them are energetic though. So, yes, mind and body and emotions, it's all energy ultimately. But this is more refined. Body is more dense. And as we go through to mind, emotions down to essence, we're talking about more light. We're going from the grosser bodies to the more subtle bodies ultimately. So you'll find this from traditional wisdom throughout the ages, but in contemporary scientific inquiry, you need to look at physics to understand this. In physics, resonance occurs when a vibrating object causes another object to start vibrating at a higher amplitude. But if two objects have a large vibrational delta, they're very far apart with their current frequency that is being emitted. When there is this large delta, there's less likelihood for resonance and ultimately less order, harmony, and compatibility experienced, creating dissonance. This is why vibrational mismatch can create disharmony within your mind body system. Thoughts and feelings arise inside that are overridden by a belief system until your body finally screams out. Like the Chinese proverb says, tension is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you are. So I walked you through the dysfunction cycle and gave you an understanding of how this has been happening. Let's go into the neuroscience, right? So our brain is always on guard for dangers or threats. It's doing that to protect us. Thank you, brain. You're really nice. The brain is encoded to interpret physical threats, such as someone holding a gun to your head, or other stressful situations, such as losing your job, as similar threats, right? Whether it's a tiger in the jungle or a tiger mom being overbearing to you, right? There's similar threats. So the danger signal is activated in the amygdala, which activates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system. But you have nowhere to run. You have no one to fight. And it's not even civil for you to do so. So you might be repressing what's inside and having this upregulation going on internally. And you might not notice it. You're like, I feel fine. Like, what do you mean? It's ultimately the brain, though, that is creating this response. Right. So, but what happens though when that sympathetic nervous system is activated? It leads to real physiologic changes, of course, because it's mobilizing your resources for survival. Muscle activation, tension, guarding, bracing, even trembling or shaking. I mean, if you've been really scared before or really nervous, you start trembling and shaking. That's the more advanced level of muscle activation. Genitourinary. It can lead to urinary urgency, and it can also inhibit healthy erectile function. Gastrointestinal system, it slows down digestion, or it can create excessive voiding. The pendulum can swing really far to either side. Cardiovascularly, increased heart rate and blood pressure in your respiratory system, you'll get faster, shallow breathing. The immune system can become suppressed. This is a time to conserve and organize all energy for survival, to fight, to flee, to fawn, or to freeze, not to rest, digest, or procreate. If you've been dealing with issues chronically for more than 3 months, your nervous system has become upregulated long term, making you more and more sensitive to triggers. This is why you might have been able to sit down without any issues, but now that your nervous system is on high alert, there's a greater sensitivity to innocuous stimuli. Your brain is creating pain or dysfunction as a messenger, as a signal. It can't talk to you. So it sends you a signal for you to change. Your brain can't send you an email. It's not able to do that. So what can it use? It can use right? It can create anxiety, it can create emotions. You can have emotional waves and you can have physical sensations. So remember, or maybe if you didn't know this, but pain and sensations in the body are created by the brain 100% of the time. I'll say that again. Pain and sensations in the body are created by the brain 100% of the time. Have someone cut your head off. Please don't do that. But and you're not going to have any sensations. Even if there was like regional sensations being created around parts of your body, the brain is actually what's allowing you to experience that. So, some examples of this: when you touch a hot stove unexpectedly, your brain sends the signal of pain to protect you so that you don't melt your skin off. There's nociception that's taking place. You feel it, right? You actually have nerve receptors on your finger, but the brain creates that signal and it's in protection. Your brain can turn pain on or off when it is needed. That's a big clue. So if it can turn it on or off, that means we can unlearn our pain or we can change neural circuitry. If you are running away from a bear in the woods, you trip and you break your ankle, your brain may not create pain in that moment because it's prioritizing survival. You just get back up and you keep running. When you finally are safe and you get and you sit down and you're like, oh my gosh, my ankle is broken, and like your pain will start being felt in many cases. But what's happening there? There are lots of, you might have had an example of playing a sport. You're just having so much fun or you're so in it, and then after you realize, whoa, I got injured. I didn't even know that happened. There are many stories of professional athletes that have done this. And endurance athletes do this all the time. They're actually overriding and they're saying, hey, there's a higher prioritization at play right now for me. So beyond the physical body having a pain response. Now there's the story of the construction worker in England. He had a nail go through his boot. He was yelling and screaming in extreme pain the entire time in the ambulance to the hospital. And they pulled the boot off. The nail went directly in between his toes. The nail had gone all the way through the boot on the top and the bottom, right? So insane, such a crazy story. But it shows you he had real pain. Was he faking it the whole time? No, he wasn't faking it. His brain was receiving input from the environment and created that sensation of pain that was very challenging to experience until it was revealed that everything's okay. Like when my daughter fell off of a bench and she fractured her wrist, she was crying, she was in pain. The brain created pain so that she would not further damage her wrist, right? That's very useful. Your brain is neuroplastic. You can retrain it. You can show the brain that you are safe, even if the danger signal has been stuck or that alarm has been stuck in the on position. You can do that. We're going to do that. We're going to talk about that together. So just remember all pain, sensations, the dysfunction, it's all real. I'm not saying that because it's created by the brain, this isn't a real thing. There's like brain created pain, then there's real pain. It's the same. They're both the same. It's just that your brain could be creating it for reasons that are not from pathological structural reasoning, but it still matters. You could be hurting inside emotionally. There could be vibrational mismatch. There could be major changes needed. This is here for you. Be wary of the guardian of the mind. Imagine there's a little sentinel, a guard who is in your mind saying, no, I will not allow any new information in unless it matches what was previously in. This can keep you stuck. These beliefs that you've had to this point can imprison you. So I just invite you to be open and just to notice the ego fights hard to defend its own self built fortress. And also, it can be very triggering to be told that you have responsibility for the creation of your physical imbalances and that years of suffering or therapies were not actually barking up the right tree. But remember, all of these steps have helped you get to this point and to not hold anything against yourself, to forgive yourself if you are holding any grievances against yourself or anyone else, or closing off to truth. Who you have been to this point created this imbalance. So, this is about changing who you are being. Your state of being is a combination of your thoughts, emotions, and actions. If you just do some therapies or even follow this plan and you go back to business as usual, if you're like, I'm just going to go back to how I was, I just want to be who I was again, you can't go back to who you were because who you were made you sick. So, this is about recognizing the imbalances in the mind, body, and emotions and changing, becoming lighter, becoming more free. And you can do that. So, I'm looking forward to guiding you. Now, keep in mind, this podcast is information, it's not application. I'm giving you the map, but you still have to go on the journey and bring the tools with you that will help when you encounter obstacles because they do come up. Consider bringing a guide on your journey. That could be myself, one of my coaches. I've written a book that may or may not be out when you're listening to this episode, but check for that. I also have a full Overcome program. This takes you through week by week with all the tools laid out, and they are actually in there for you. The meditations, the emotional releases, the movements, there's coaching support. It's all there. So if you want extra help, we have that for you. Otherwise, you can do it on your own. Just remember, though, this isn't just about information, it's about applying it and integrating it into who you are being. Also, I created a self assessment and root cause discovery workbook. It's totally free. It goes along with this podcast. So you can tease out your own situation. You can realize, okay, this is literally what I'm dealing with. This is why I'm dealing with it. And what can I do from here? So it's a really nice workbook. Go to our website. You can get that. It's in the show notes. In the next episode, we will talk about how the brain creates dysfunction and why it is doing that. And I'll see you there.